Thank you so much, ladies. The week after Thanksgiving, 1998, was supposed to be the highlight of my life. Maybe the Lord knows that I had been looking forward to it too much. The Monday after Thanksgiving that year, I was supposed to fly to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I was supposed to speak for 15 minutes. Dr. Tom Maccabee, who is the vice president of Zondervan Publishing House, was supposed to speak 15 minutes. It was going to be covered by Bible Believers Network. Christianity Today actually ran an article about that particular day. It was supposed to be a historic day. The publishers from all of our Holiness publishing houses, Kelly Gallagher, who at that time was with Beacon Hill Press, Nathan Berkey from Wesleyan Press or Wesleyan Publishing House, Colonel Marlene Chase from the Salvation Army, all of them. They were all to stand behind me as I signed the contract to produce the Reflecting God Study Bible, the first study Bible of a holiness perspective to be put out with the NIV translation. In fact, since that time, that study Bible has sold more copies. It's out of print now, but sold more copies than any other holiness work of this century. It was going to be a highlight for me. It was the culmination of about a year and a half's worth of work. From there, I was supposed to fly to Branson, Missouri, where I had what I considered to be probably the second greatest honor of my life. I've been a district superintendent now in the Wesleyan Church, as I mentioned, for 19 years. But at that time, I was still the youngest, though I was 40. And that year, as we were approaching the dawning of a new millennium, we had a meeting of all of the district superintendents of the denomination, the college presidents, the general directors of the Wesleyan Church. And they decided that instead of bringing in some high-powered speaker, that they were going to have two of the young district superintendents to share. Dr. Jerry Pence, who is now one of our general superintendents, he was to share looking back on where the church had been over the last century. And I was asked to share on the future direction of the church and what God needed to do for us to be equipped for ministry in the next century. To be honest, to be asked to speak to your peers, I consider to be one of the greatest honors of my life. That week was to hold two of the things that I thought would be the culmination of my life. But Thanksgiving Day in Bloomington, Indiana, early in the morning, actually, about 2 o'clock in the morning, we were in the little farmhouse where my wife was raised. I woke up in the middle of the night with a pain in the center of my back, radiating down my left arm. I wasn't sure if I had just slept wrong or what was the problem, but no matter what I did, I could not get relief from it. I didn't want to disturb my wife, but when she finally woke up, I tried to get her to rub it down, see if I could get this nauseating pain to relinquish. It did not. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and so I checked my sugar that morning, and it was already going up. It was about 250 or so, and so I took the insulin to bring it down. I didn't want to spoil her Thanksgiving Day, and so we went on to the family gathering for the meal. I would slip out to the van every hour or so and check my sugar. And instead of it going down, it kept going up, and this pain would not let up. Finally, after the meal, I told my wife, I said, honey, we'd better go to the hospital. I don't know what's going on in my body, but I've taken enough insulin for 2 days, and my sugar is approaching 500 and still climbing. We went to the hospital. They did all the tests that they do, and in a short time, the doctor came out and said, young man, at some point in your life, you've had a major heart attack. I said, "Doctor, if I've had a heart attack, it's been in the last 2 weeks. I just had a complete physical and stress test 2 weeks ago and was given a clean bill of health. If I've had one, it's been in the last 2 weeks." They ran the blood work, waited for the test, and an hour or two later he came back and said, "I've got bad news for you." He said, "I need to rephrase it. You're having a major heart attack. The enzymes are climbing and all of the other things that are indicators." I said, "Doctor, that's fine, but I've got to be in Grand Rapids on Monday." He said, "You don't understand. You're having a major heart attack." I said, "No, you don't understand. I've got to be in Grand Rapids on Monday." They wanted to send me to St. Vincent's Hospital in Indianapolis to have a heart cath, and I said, "There's no way I'm going to do that. One thing, I'm a Tennessee boy, and I know what would happen if I went up there and needed surgery. They'd want to do it up there, and I wasn't going to have surgery, 3 states away. And my oldest daughter is married to a police officer, and they hadn't been able to be there for Thanksgiving, and I wasn't going to have no Yankee cut on me. And so I said, "You get me stable and send me back to Knoxville, and we'll see what happens there." But I said, I really need to be in, Michigan on Monday. Well, Monday, instead of being in Michigan, I'm at St. Mary's Hospital in Knoxville, Tennessee. The heart cath is done, and the doctor comes out with the grim prognosis. In fact, I had my second heart attack in the middle of the heart cath. He said, "You're a very fortunate young man. The widowmaker, the left artery, the main artery, is shut down 100%. And he said, "Your heart, over half of your heart is not functioning. And we don't really know the extent of the damage." He said, "We're not sure how much of the damage is permanent, but," he said, "you're going to have to have open heart surgery tomorrow, Tuesday, the day in Grand Rapids when I was to speak and to sign the contract for the Reflecting God Study Bible." My world came crumbling in. I've never quite forgiven John Van Valen from the Light and Life Publishing House of the Free Methodist Church, because in Christianity Today, a short time later, there was a picture of Tom Maccabee sitting at a table, and John Van Valen sitting at the table signing the contract. To make matters worse, they did have my name under the picture, but it was John Van Valen. I just want you to know tonight, John Van Valen did not sign that contract. I signed it from a hospital bed, and it was faxed from Knoxville, Tennessee. But instead of getting to speak, I was preparing for open heart surgery. 40 years of age, not sure whether my ministry was coming to an end. It certainly was not what I had expected. The night before surgery was the darkest night, I believe, of my life. I had been raised, my father, his favorite text was Romans 8:28. That was his passage, his promise. And I had been taught to accept the fact that all things work together for the good to them that love the Lord. And I don't think up till that night I had ever questioned God. I don't think I had ever asked God, why is this happening, or why are you doing this? That was something that was so foreign to my nature until that night. To make matters worse, doctors are kind of stupid, or at least hospitals are. I mean, if there was ever a time when you need your family, it's when you're hurting and you're sick and you're facing open heart surgery, and instead of letting my wife be there by my side the whole time, they would keep her out in the waiting room and let her come back for 5 minutes every 6 hours. That was the loneliest place in the world. But I discovered something that night before surgery as I began to question God and wonder why all this was happening. They could shut my wife out, but they couldn't shut God. in my discouragement, in my despair that night, I had one of the greatest encounters with God that I've ever experienced in my life. Laying there on that hospital bed, IVs everywhere. I couldn't move much. I could just barely move my right arm. It was free enough that I could at least maneuver it a little. And I'm laying there in that coronary intensive care unit, and I see that old Gideon Bible laying there on the little table that was across my bed, and I could just barely reach it. And I pulled it to me, hoping that somehow I would find solace, that I would find just what I needed for that occasion. And I knew that wherever it fell open, that was going to have to be what God used. I'm not one of those people that just kind of opens the Bible and puts my finger down and says, this is going to be a word from the Lord. I've always been afraid that I'd put my finger on something like he went out and hanged himself or something. So I'm not one of those, that just kind of pick and chooses. But that night, there was no way I could maneuver the Bible. Where it opened, that was it. And thank the Lord, it opened to the book of Romans, chapter 8. Now, it actually opened to what page would have contained chapter 9, but because I knew I could only read that page, I couldn't even flip the page. I started reading in the upper left-hand corner of that Gideon Bible instead of reading it at the breaking point of a chapter. And God settled down in such a powerful way and spoke to me that night, and knowing my analytical mind, He even spoke to me in a 4-point outline. Now, in case I don't make it through this message tonight, let me just share with you the 4 things that God gave to me, and then I'm going to look at them verse by verse. Number 1, suffering is not forever. Suffering is not forever. Number 2, we are saved by hope. We are saved by hope. Number 3, God has given us a partner in our suffering. And number 4, God always has a purpose for our suffering. First, we need to be reminded that suffering is not forever. We'll pick it up here with verse 18 because that happened to be what was in the upper left-hand corner of that Gideon Bible, and I'm glad it is. And I'll also have to tell you, I'm glad Gideon Bibles are King James Version. I'm not against other versions, please don't get me wrong, but if I'd read a newer version, I wouldn't have known that the Apostle Paul was a Southerner like me. You didn't know that, did you? But it's here. Because listen to how verse 18 begins. For I reckon, if he would have been a Yankee, he would have said, now I suppose. But he was a Southern boy. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. Now, I will have to tell you that when I first read those verses, I almost laughed out loud in spite of my depression. Does it hit you? Do you see the ludicrous comparison that the Apostle Paul makes? The Apostle Paul has a penchant for comparisons. He has a way of taking things from everyday life and comparing them to a spiritual truth and making an application that just comes alive. For example, when he wants us to understand that the Christian life is a warfare and not easygoing, he describes what? He describes the helmet and the sword and the shield and the breastplate, and he uses word pictures describing battle gear and describing warfare so that we can visualize and understand. It is a comparison that is a logical comparison. At times he uses comparisons from the farm. At times he uses comparisons from the athlete and preparing for the race and pressing for the mark. But the Apostle Paul had a penchant for making comparisons, painting word pictures that we can understand. But on this occasion, the Apostle Paul makes a comparison that is so ludicrous. The church at Rome is a hurting church. It is a church that had come in for its share of persecution. They were living under constant fear of oppression from the emperor of Rome. And sometimes as you read through, it's almost as if Paul has to keep coming back to the unasked question: why are we suffering? Why do bad things happen to God's people? Why is it that the emperor can wade in the innocent blood of God's people while we suffer? Why? And here Paul seems to answer that unasked question by making a comparison. Now catch it. He said, "For I reckon that the sufferings of this present world don't compare very well with the glory that God has in store for us." Comparing suffering with glory. But do you see what he's saying to them? We get so caught up in the here and now and in the moment that we lose sight of the fact that God's plan is not a plan for the moment. God sees a far bigger picture, and the suffering that we may go through may be for a time, but I want to tell you what God has in store for us far outweighs anything that we might endure for the moment. In fact, I remember one of the greatest spiritual lessons that I think that I ever learned. I was pastoring in the hills of eastern Kentucky, and we had a man who was a part of our church there in Olive Hill who was a rather eccentric man. I loved him to death, and I think in some ways that Woodrow Moore had the greatest mind that I ever knew. He farmed a couple of 100 acres, but he and his brothers, they almost lived like Amish. Woodrow never drove a car, never had a tractor. He farmed the land that he had with a couple of old mules. And somebody had to pick them up, bring them to church. Woodrow had an 8th grade education, and it had come in a one-room schoolhouse that sat on the back of the farm. In his boyhood days, he was not an educated man. But he was one of the deepest thinkers I think I ever knew. I call him one of those homespun philosophers. He just was a man full of common sense. Mike Schaefer is now a principal in Ohio. For several years, he taught in Indiana Wesleyan University. While I was pastoring there, Mike was working on a graduate degree at Morehead State University and teaching our adult Sunday school class. Mike told me on one occasion, he said, "Brother Hotle, whenever I come to something I don't understand as I'm preparing for a Sunday school lesson or preparing for a message, you know where I go for answers?" I said, "No, Mike, where do you go?" He said, "Not to books, I'll tell you." He said, "I go to Woodrow Moore." He said, "That man has such keen insights into the things of God and just such a practical wisdom." He said, "Whenever I don't understand something, I go to Woodrow." I understood that. It was a hot August day. I had visited he and Bessie, and Woodrow, whenever the preacher would come, would always stop whatever he was doing. We would sit out on a swing that he had hanging under an old tree in the front yard. We could look out over the valley there below the farmhouse, and we would spend a little time together just visiting and drinking some of Bessie's tea. And I don't know what we'd been talking about. Woodrow, while he was a deep thinker, was also one of those guys that didn't really say a lot. You know, sometimes you'd sit there for 5 or 10 minutes just saying nothing, and then he'd come out with something rich, you know. We were just sitting there. I don't know what we'd been thinking about, but I remember yet him looking at me and said, "You know, Pastor, the problem with us is we want to be the rich man in this life and Lazarus in the life to come." I said, "Woodrow, what are you talking about?" He said, "Now think about it, preacher. We want to be the rich man in this life and Lazarus in the life to come. We're always complaining. Why is this happening to me? And why does God allow Christians to suffer? And why does God allow sinners to prosper? And he said, it really doesn't make much sense. He said, all of us have sinned at one point. Why is it we want God to give us a silver spoon in our mouth in this life and then bless us throughout the ceaseless ages of eternity? And why is it we want God to punish the poor sinner when he's going to spend the rest of eternity in hell? He said, you know, preacher, every morning I wake up and say, God bless the sinner. Give him happiness. Give him joy. Give him pleasure, because, Lord, it's the only happiness and joy he's ever going to know. He said, preacher, we want to be the rich man in this life and Lazarus in the life to come. But he said, when you look at it through God's eyes, I much prefer being Lazarus. You see, suffering, friend, is not forever. And sometimes we get so focused on the suffering of the moment that we lose sight of the fact that God has something better in store for those who are faithful and hold true to Him. And I want to tell you, the glory that He has in store for us doesn't compare very well to the sufferings of this present moment. But not only did He show me that suffering is not forever, but number two, what is it that holds us when we suffer? What is it that keeps us? And it is simply this: we are saved by hope. Let's continue on with verse 20. For the creature was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of Him who hath subjected the same in hope. Because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know, I want you to catch this, listen to it. For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. The whole creation, saved and unsaved, we're all groaning together. Not only they, speaking of the lost, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. For we are saved by hope. But hope that is seen is not yet hope, or is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for? But if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. There's a couple of things that the Lord showed me here, even though it's one point, but there were kind of two things that really spoke to me here. I hope you caught it. We all, saved and unsaved, we groan together until now. See, I had been asking the Lord that night, Lord, why are you doing this to me? Why did I have these heart attacks? Why in the world am I laying here in this bed and don't know what the future holds? Why are you doing this to me? And the Lord whispered to me through these verses and said, son, if you'd have been the worst sinner in the world, you'd be laying right here in this bed with this heart attack. You didn't have these heart attacks because you're a Christian. You had them because of your family genes. See, my family always had heart attacks young. Now, I grant you, I'm younger than anybody else. But you see, on my mother's side of the family, my grandmother was a type 1 diabetic. I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I got the diabetes from that side of the family. My dad's family has heart issues. My dad had his first heart attack when he was 53. His mother was 53. His dad was 53 when they had their first heart attack. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, all right, there it is. Why didn't you wait and have it when you was 53? Well, see, I'm a diabetic, so I got to have mine 13 years quicker. Because I got bad genes from both sides of the family tree. I didn't have the heart attack because I was a Christian. If I had been the worst sinner in the world, I would have been laying right there on that bed facing open heart surgery. So I'm going to tell you something, friend. I believe in healing. There have been times that God did heal me, and there's not a question in my mind about it, and I thank God for those times. But can I tell you a little secret? exactly 100% of the people die. This may come as a surprise to you, but even faith healers die. Not only that, but over 8 out of 10 of us are going to get sick before we die. In other words, we're going to die because of some illness or sickness. Only 17% of us will be fortunate enough to die by some accidental means. So I can just about promise you, you're going to suffer before you die. And that statistic is no different for saint than it is for sinner. We all are going to suffer somewhere down the line. Now, I know in the mountains where I come from, we sing a lot of songs we don't mean. Oh, I think we mean them. But we talk about being homesick for heaven and how we just can't wait to go, but it's really not true. Because the moment we get a headache, we head for the medicine cabinet. The moment we get sick, we head to the doctor. We may act like we're homesick, but can I tell you a little secret? If God really did heal us every time we ask, and we got to choose when we went to heaven, you could have had Apostle Paul preach this camp meeting. Because I guarantee you, no matter how old he was, he would have found some reason to put it off another 30 years. That's just life. A few years ago now, I had the privilege of preaching my step-grandmother's funeral. She was a godly saint. My grandfather had been married, of course, to my real grandmother, and she was the invalid, and she died fairly young. He married a pastor's widow, another godly lady. In fact, dear old Granny was married 4 times. 3 of them were preachers, and she outlived them all. Granny lived to be nearly 100. And she had asked years earlier that I preach her funeral, though she had other grandkids in ministry. Some reason Granny wanted me, and so I headed up after she had died, and there was my uncle, Uncle Sam Condon, who had pastored our Clinton church for many years, and the moment he sees me, Uncle Sam heads for me, tears streaming down his cheeks, and I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, "Marlin, why did God take my mommy?" And I'm going, duh, she was nearly 100. But I understood, you see, because even though she was, in his heart, he wanted to hold on to her. He wasn't ready. He wouldn't have been ready if God had let her live to be 200. And while I love God, I will tell you that what I was thinking about when I was facing open heart surgery is, man, I'd sure love at least to see my kids all graduate from high school. And I wouldn't mind seeing my grandbaby, when I have one. Got 5 now. I mean, all I could think about was things, Lord, just kind of give me another 5 or 10 years. And if he had, I'd have probably found a reason to want another 5 or 10. Well, he did, thank goodness. But you know what I'm talking about. Oh, we can talk about it all we want, but we want to live. But now listen to me. You may be thinking, well, preacher, then what separates us from the sinner? What makes us any different than they are in suffering? It is this. We have hope. You see, while I want to live, and you want to live, I have been around some of God's saints who wanted to die. The suffering had endured day after day. And the pain and the anguish had so wearied them until they were tired. And there was no fear, and there was no question mark, or there was no uncertainty. They were looking. They were longing. My wife and I coming over to church tonight, I do what I do often. I was listening to a preacher. I was listening to Brother D.W. Lacey, who had been my grandfather's district superintendent years ago and used to be president of the old Colorado Springs Bible College back in the old Pilgrim days. And I said to Darla, I said, honey, when I pastored Frankfort, I had the privilege of pastoring some of the godliest saints that I've ever known. The Bible college used to be there, and I could go through the list of the former professors and superintendents, and one of them, maybe his name wouldn't ring a bell out here, but in our part of the country, Floyd Goins, F.J. Goins, was a great evangelist and preacher of the old school that God used mightily. His widow, Sister Goins, I had the privilege of being her pastor the last 3.5, 4 years of her life. What a saint of God. I remember when Sister Goins died. She had had cancer for weeks, months, and had fought such a valiant battle. But I went to see her one Monday morning there in the hospital in Indianapolis, and Sister Goins said, "Oh, Brother Hotle," said, "I'm so glad to see you." Said, "I tried to get him to call you yesterday. I wanted you to come, and I wanted you to bring Dr. Williams, and I wanted you to bring Brother Batman, and I wanted the three of you to join hands around my bed and lay hands on me and pray that God would take me home." Boy, I was glad they didn't call. I mean, I could have just pictured it, the three of us laying hands on her and some doctor walking by and we're saying, "Kill her, Lord!" But I knew what she was feeling. She was saying, "Oh, Brother Hotle, the pain is so great, but I know that on the other side, there's no fear, there's no question marks. There's a land where the pain will be forever behind me, and I'll get to see my Savior face to face, and it is that hope that holds us secure." You know what makes me feel sorry for young people? I mentioned the other morning in the service that in our world, and I'm sure you're aware of it, for those under the age of 25, the leading cause of death is suicide. But is it any wonder? We've told them there are no absolutes. There is no God that's in control. And can I tell you, if I believed that, I would live in a constant state of depression when I see the news and read the newspapers and know what's going on. If I really believed there was no God, I'd be of all men most miserable. But I'm glad that for us we have a hope beyond this veil of sorrow. And in spite of the uncertainties and in spite of what goes on all around us, there's something that holds us secure. You see, it's not that God heals us every time we ask, or God says we'll never face sorrow or trial or difficulty, but He said, "You can trust me and know that I'm going to bring you out victorious." We are saved by hope. But now come on, He doesn't end there. He goes a step further. He gives us something beyond hope. He gives us a partner with us in our suffering. Let's pick it up now in verse 26. "Likewise the Spirit also helpeth our infirmities. For we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit Himself maketh intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. He that searcheth the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because He maketh intercession for the saints according to the will of God." Oh, do you catch what he's saying there, friend? Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying now, but I'm going to tell you some of the greatest prayer times that I've ever had, and some of the greatest answers to prayer that I've ever seen. I have no idea what I asked for. Now, hold on a minute, all right? I'm not talking about an unknown language. I want you to stay with me, all right? I'm not talking about that. Some of you understand what I'm talking about. Those times when the words wouldn't come, when the tears flowed and you didn't know what to ask for, and all you could do was kneel in the presence of Almighty God and weep and groan. But you became conscious of a presence from another world, and you knew that the one who dwelled within, you catch it? He knows your heart. He knows the mind of God. He makes intercession for you with groanings which cannot be uttered. You see, when you get to the point when you can't pray for yourself, He prays. He prays. Let me try to illustrate. 2 years after my heart attacks, my oldest daughter, her and her husband were expecting their first child. He was in the police academy in Nashville at that time, preparing for work in the police department where he's worked now ever since. And my daughter, in a lot of ways, is like her daddy. I went on blood pressure medicine when I was 19. Sonia was 19 when she went on blood pressure medicine. And from the moment that she got pregnant with their first child, she had complications and problems, one after another, and one hospital stay, it seemed, after another. And in fact, the doctor had already told her before this night that if she was able to carry The child successfully, through to its birth, that she probably should never try to have any more babies. Just so many problems that she had faced. It was about 2.5 months or so before Preston was to be born. They knew by then that it was going to be a little grandson, and she'd had problems. And Scott had been at the academy, and I'm going to tell you, that was like boot camp. You know, if I don't know what it's like everywhere, but he would go to Nashville on Sunday afternoon, and you know, it was just like a military boot camp. He'd get to come home Saturday night, the only time of the week, and go to church on Sunday morning, and then he'd head back to where he lived there in a dorm. And that week, the church at Clinton had a baby shower for Sonia. And as Scott come in late, she had taken him into the nursery, and they were looking at the toys and the things, so excited, you know, about their first child and our first grandchild. And all of a sudden, things began to happen. My daughter called me probably midnight. She was crying. She was frantic. She said, "Daddy, will you come and get us and take us to the hospital? I think I'm losing my baby." And of course, the doctor had already told them he didn't think they could have more if this one didn't work out. And I rushed over there, Darla and I even scared my son-in-law. I think I ran every red light between Clinton and Oak Ridge. We got them in, and the doctor came out a little while later, and he said, "I don't know if we can save the baby or not." Placenta was, I don't know how to get into all of it. I just say that it was tearing loose, and he said, "The baby's still alive, but just barely connected." And he said, "In all honesty, I don't know that we can save it tonight, and if we do, she's going to have to be flat of her back, and I'm not sure that she can carry it to full term." Didn't look good. I still remember my daughter that night looking at me, saying, "Daddy, pray. Pray." I made my way down to the chapel there about 2:30 in the morning now. The lights are off, just the light behind the stained glass window. And I knelt there in front of the cross there in that stained glass window, and I knew what I wanted to say. I wanted to say, "Lord, this is our first grandchild. You know my daughter and all that she's gone through. And Lord, please spare this baby. We want this baby. Please let it live." And that's what I wanted to say. But there was something else in my heart that thought, "Lord, what if you know that this baby's going to grow up and live a life of sin and die and split hell wide open? Lord, I don't want one of my grandkids to come into this world only to populate hell." Maybe you're being merciful. I don't know. And so try as I would, every time I tried to say the words, they wouldn't come because I didn't know how to pray. All I could do was just kneel there and weep. But I'll never forget, all of a sudden I knew there was a presence there from another world. Whoop! I knew God was there. And as I knelt there and wept, I just felt that burden as it lifted. And I got up. I'll never forget. I got up. I hadn't said a word. But I knew the burden was lifted, and God assured me it's going to be all right. Now, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it meant the baby was going to die I didn't know, but I knew this. God said, "It's going to be all right." I went back and I told Sonia, I said, "Honey, I don't know what it means. I don't know if this little baby's going to live or die, but I know that God assured me it's okay, and so we're just going to trust Him. It's all right." They were able somehow to save the child that night, but things didn't go well. Finally, you know, they had to take her in, and the child was going to be born premature, and they weren't sure how it would do. And then when it was born, they discovered, I don't even want to get into all of it, it's too hard, but the fluid had all drained out, and the baby was in a dry sack, and they nearly lost both of them. In fact, they did, really, when the baby was being born. What an awful day. Sonia's heart stopped in the middle of it all, and they had to do a code blue, and she had one of those experiences literally where she saw herself rising out of her body and looked down and saw them doing the electric just a horrific experience. When the baby was born, its heart wasn't beating either. Its head was swollen and blue, and they weren't sure if it had had brain damage. They rushed it over to the children's hospital where it would spend the first weeks of his life. I remember at the end of that awful day, my daughter turned to me again and said, "Daddy, pray." I said, "Honey, I don't need to. I can't explain it to you." I looked at that child, heartbreaking, but I said, "God told me down in that chapel, He's all right. It's in His hands. Just going to have to trust Him, whatever it means. We're going to trust Him." And I'm going to tell you that child is all right. Just a couple of weeks ago, that little boy loves God with all of his heart. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, Darla and I were so proud. We went for his 5th grade graduation. You know, down there, elementary school goes through 5th grade, and they had a 5th grade graduation, and they give an award, which is the highest award in their little elementary school. And it's named for a man who graduated from the first 5th grade class years ago. He's up in his 80s now, and every year they honor a child whose character and conduct exemplifies what they think a young man ought to be, and they have a scholarship they name for him, and they buy $200 worth of books in the library and put it in honor of them in a plaque. And I was so proud when they called my little grandson up and said, you know, he's so polite and so just, you know, yes ma'am and no ma'am, and just exemplifies what a little gentleman ought to be. And I'm glad he loves God with all of his heart, and he's all right. But listen to me, friends, some of you know what I'm talking about tonight. You've been there on those occasions when your world was crushing in around you and your heart was breaking nearly in two, and the words wouldn't come. But there was one who knew your heart and knew the mind of God, and when you knew not how to pray as you ought nor what to pray for, He made intercessions for you. God gives us a partner with us in our suffering. Oh, not only does He never leave us alone, but praise God, He knows how to pray when we can't. One more and I got to hurry. God always has a purpose for our suffering. Let's pick it up now there in verse 28. For we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose. Now, oftentimes we stop there and we miss it. I'm glad Brother Don didn't do that this afternoon. That wonderful Bible study went on, because if you stop there, you miss it. What is His purpose? What is His purpose? He goes on to describe it. For whom He did foreknow, He also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of His Son. See, that's holiness right there, Brother Don. You just wonder, right there it is. You know what holiness is? It's being conformed into the image of Christ. You see, God's purpose is not your happiness. God's purpose is not your pleasure. God's purpose is your holiness. So you might be conformed. Now what God whispered to me then almost seemed like a contradiction. It took me a second to get it. God said, "Son, you had this heart attack because I can use it to make you more like me." I said, "Now wait a minute, Lord. A few minutes ago, you told me I didn't have this heart attack because I was a Christian. That I'd have had it if I'd have been the worst sinner in the world." And God said, "That's right. But, son, while I didn't send it to you, don't you think I could have stopped it?" And I would have stopped it, except I can use it to help you become more like me. Well, all of a sudden, Romans 8:28 made sense. All things work together for the good to them that love the Lord. It's not that He sends all things, but He either sends them or allows them, but the devil can't win. I mean, the devil can do what he will to try to defeat you and destroy you and tear you down, but God said, "Now wait a minute, that's going a little too far. There's a hedge here," or He'll say, "I think I can use that for their good and my honor and glory." But everything that comes to you comes from the hand of a God who loves you and said, "I want to make you more like me." The old poem puts it well. "No chance has brought this ill to me. 'Tis God's sweet will, so let it be. He seeth what I cannot see. There is a need before each pain, and He will one day make it plain that earthly loss is heavenly gain. And like as a piece of tapestry when appeared from the back appears to be but hopeless threads mixed helplessly, but in the front a picture rare rewards the worker for his care, proving his love and patience rare. Thou art the workman, I the frame. Lord, for the glory of thy name, perfect thine image on the same. Can I tell you something? My wife and I talk about it, and I'm not going to tell you what the issues are you don't need to know. Maybe it was brought about by pride and arrogance. But as much almost as any spiritual event that I ever had happen at an altar, 3 heart attacks were a wake-up call. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm healthy tonight for the most part. I thank God. I do. But I wouldn't take anything for coming near death's door. Because God had some things that I would never have seen or dealt with any other way. God said, child, I allowed it. Now let it do its work. Let it do its work. And so tonight, whoever this is for, 4 things. Number 1, suffering is not forever. It's not going to be long until the clouds will part. This isn't the end of the story, friend. Suffering's not forever. Number 2, God's given you hope. You're serving a God who's in control and you can trust Him, and that hope will hold you steady when the storms are raging. Number 3, He's done something deeper than that. He's given you the Holy Spirit who knows how to pray even when you don't. Knows your heart, knows the mind of God, and He'll make intercessions for you when you don't know how to intercede for yourself. And number 4, God always has a purpose. Trust Him. Trust Him. Let's stand. I don't know who this is for tonight. In fact, my wife, we were talking about this, and she said, Marlin, you think maybe something else, the people at Knoxville, they've heard that. But I'll tell you something, friend, before I ever got here, before I ever drove to Knoxville, God told me Thursday night this message. I don't know who it's for, but if it's for you, maybe you just feel like you need to bow before Him and weep tonight and let Him do the praying. That's all right, wherever you are. If this is for you, let it speak to your heart. We're just going to sing in closing. I know this isn't an evangelistic sermon as such, but if you have a need, the altar is open, and the God who loves you is here to meet your need. Let's mind Him.
Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. O soul, are you wearied and troubled?
Is He nudging you tonight?
No light in the darkness.
It's all right.
You see, there's a light for a look at the Savior, and life more abundant and free. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will
join with us in singing that chorus? Oh, and do it, friend. That's what it's all about. Quit looking in, quit looking at the pain and the struggle of this present moment, but turn your eyes on Him and look full in His wonderful face. It's not long until everything will be in perspective. Come on. And let's obey Him tonight as we sing that chorus together. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and praise. Now, we're not going to sing on tonight. This altar's open. I'd like for a good number of you that know the worth of prayer, if you'll gather and help us pray, we'd appreciate it. I'm not going to pray a dismissal prayer. But if your heart is heavy, this altar's still open, and you can come and lay it right here and just let God do what He wants to do for you tonight. If you must leave, be reverent and quiet as you do so. You can either be seated or gather and help us pray or slip out, but please be reverent as we do business around this altar for God. God bless you. You're dismissed.